Well, hello everybody. I'm thrilled today because for this particular SciTech, I have an old friend, Dr. Mark Shaefer, and Dr. Shaefer and I worked together many years ago with a company called Glaxo Wellcome, where we did HIV drug development together. Mark, how are you today?
I'm great, Russ. Thanks for having me on the program.
Well, Mark, thanks for joining us with SciTech, and at our helm here doing the technical part of SciTech is Sean Killebrew. Sean, good to see you again.
Thanks, Russ. Good to see you as well.
Mark, you are the clinical head of antivirals for a company called Hengrui, USA. Tell me a little bit about yourself, your education and training.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Russ. Yep. Yeah. So I don't know if you even know this, Russ, but I started out with a bachelor's degree in biology, and took a couple of years off. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with my biology degree, and I ended up, believe it or not, being getting a job with the Naval Oceanographic Office as a geophysicist for a couple of years, which was very interesting kind of aside. It also helped me to understand that that wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. It was interesting, but not kind of where I wanted to go. And so while I was doing that job, I revisited something I had found at the end of my college career, and that was a School of Pharmacy. So I had applied for the School of Pharmacy in California, where I was from. And at the time, there were three. And I ended up getting into one called University of California at San Francisco, at the time one of the best in the world. And I was very fortunate to do that, and it really set me off on a path to get my pharmacy degree. But I also found out along the way, I really, besides stepping foot into a pharmacy to get a prescription, perhaps, I really didn't know a lot about pharmacists and what pharmacy was. But it ended up being a really good decision. So it was a little bit happenstance that I did it. Had some good mentoring from a couple of people that this was a good career path, and ended up deciding that in pharmacy there are lots of things you can do. The one thing I pretty much knew as I went through was I don't really want to be the pharmacist, although they're very important. But the guy standing behind the counter or gal standing behind the counter at Walgreens or CVS or one of the chain pharmacies was not kind of where I wanted to go with my career. So ended up moving after my Doctor of Pharmacy degree into a residency, a one-year residency program at the University of Nebraska. Decided to get an experience outside the home state of California and then move back. Well, that didn't really work out either. I ended up meeting my now wife and stayed in Nebraska as faculty and had a career actually doing solid organ liver transplant with a group, which was phenomenal, and I loved it. And then, it really led me into a path where I was doing a lot of work with these patients whose immune systems were compromised because of what we were doing to keep their organs from rejecting. And that meant there were a lot of infections and a lot of viral infections. And it really got me involved and interested in viral infections, including herpes viruses and others. And I only say that because that's kind of what led me down the career path that I ended up in. So one day I tell people a moment of weakness. I loved what I did, but one day I got a call from a recruiter who said, "Hey, we have this job in North Carolina, a small company called Burroughs Wellcome, and they want somebody to come work on this drug called valacyclovir, which is for herpes viruses." And I knew the drug and I knew the company, and one thing led to another. And the next thing I knew, I was packing up my wife and three children, and against the better advice of my mother-in-law, who didn't want me to move the family, we came to North Carolina, and that was probably about 28 years ago now that we did that. So sometimes I think in your career, the thing that it really taught me then was you need to take a chance. I mean, I obviously had an academic career. I was doing fairly well. And I had a good mentor that I talked to about the potential of moving from that academic career into a career in the pharmaceutical industry. And I think one of the things he said to me at the time was, if you don't do this, of course you'll be able to continue and you'll do well in your academic career, but you'll always wonder, what if I had done this, right? And if you go and it doesn't work out, you can always come back or you can do something else. So, there's not that much risk in doing this. Obviously there is some, but you'll just never know unless you try it. Well, of course, then I tried it and I've never gone back. So it was an interesting kind of career moment. I think some interesting lessons along that too is, make sure you have those kinds of mentors in your life that you can use to bounce things off of. And sometimes the advice may not be good, but hopefully a good mentor will lead you to the decision, not push you into a decision, but help you decide those kind of key things that you go along the way. So that's how I got to where I am, and it's been a long career, and mostly involved in the treatment and developing drugs for HIV, which has just been a phenomenal career path for me.
Mark, what a great summary of your academic and transfer to industry, and we both, I think, connect in a lot of ways. Not only did we work together, but interestingly enough, as you spoke, I think of the Nobel laureates that we worked with at Burroughs Wellcome. I think of mentors, and we've both had strong mentors. These are great messages for our students, so I really appreciate that. Can you tell us a little bit more about your involvement with the HIV therapies? These were such important breakthroughs back then, and it has really transformed over time. Can you give us a little bit more detail?
Sure, Russ. Yeah, it's quite interesting that, as I mentioned, I went to school. My pharmacy school was in San Francisco, and it just so happened I started school in 1981. It ages me a little bit, but it also is important because that's really right when HIV hit. And of course, for the students, they may not remember, but New York and San Francisco were really hot spots for HIV in the early days. The first kind of announcements came from Los Angeles, from Michael Gottlieb, but really San Francisco and New York were hit particularly hard because of the gay populations in those cities at the time. And so from an early time in my pharmacy school career, I was kind of involved with HIV, but then I got a little bit out of that, although I did lectures for the students in the pharmacy school on HIV. But I ended up working on the herpes viruses to start with. And then which happens sometimes, Glaxo bought Burroughs Wellcome, and I all of a sudden found myself at Glaxo Wellcome. They asked me to move from the herpes viruses to help start the HIV group. And that really was, again, another difficult decision. I really enjoyed what I was doing on the program I was working with. We had just launched a drug, and it was a great drug. It's still a great drug for herpes and shingles and other infections. But then I went into the HIV group, and it was a particularly important time in the therapy of HIV. The students, again, may not remember this, but Burroughs Wellcome was the company that developed the first drug for HIV, AZT. And Glaxo had a drug called 3TC, and the two of them together was a really phenomenal advance for the therapy of HIV. So I was really thrilled to be able to help start the HIV group that we were going to do. And over the years that I was there, have helped to develop and put over 10 drugs on the market for HIV. And it really was something where in the pharmaceutical industry, one of the things that there's a couple of things that happened. One is it's a much maligned industry. A lot of people think that, the industries, they just charge way too much for their drugs and they do terrible things. I'll point to a current event though, that, think about where we would be with the whole COVID thing if AstraZeneca, if Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and Moderna had not been able to generate a vaccine in a very quick way to help us at least not get out of, but at least help squash this pandemic a little bit. And so you think about the things, Burroughs Wellcome, Marty St. Clair, who was one of the virologists we worked with. Believe it or not, she's still there working. She's 47, 48 years now in her career. And she was the one who discovered the activity of AZT, the first drug that they used to treat HIV. And so along the way, it was such a phenomenal thing to work in. I often would have people say, gosh, you work weekends, you work nights, you're gone all the time. Why would you do that? And I said, because it's not really a job to me, it's a passion. There are very few careers that you can do where you feel like you are having a potential impact, a huge impact on the lives of millions of people. And it's one thing I tell pharmacy students when I speak with them. When I was doing transplant, I could help 40 patients at a time, and it was phenomenal. And putting a new liver in someone and seeing them get a new lease on life was fantastic and rewarding. But it's a few patients at a time. All of a sudden, you're helping to develop a drug which can help millions of people. The 38 million people around the world still dealing with HIV. And it's such a rewarding thing that you don't even think twice, as about, the nights we would have, or, being up on a call with Europe or around the world when you're, dealing with a new drug that you're developing or something. It's just, you don't even think about that because you think about the end result, or that patient that you saw who came up and thanked you for developing the drug that saved their life. It's a feeling that is just incomparable, really.
Mark, that was a wonderful summary of your experience with HIV, and you must feel very proud, actually. And I'm thinking one of these questions that we need to ask you is what is your most your significant achievement that you're really proud of? Is it within that HIV time, or is it something else?
It is, Russ, and I've been very fortunate, like I said, to have worked on a number of great products that have been very helpful for patients and made incredible innovations. Taking HIV patients from handfuls of pills a day down to what now is one pill once a day, or even beyond that now, working on products that may be given once a month or once every 2 months for people with HIV. But and you'll probably remember this one. We worked on a drug that was a really good drug called abacavir. And abacavir was being developed and had this, was a really fantastic drug. But unfortunately, it also had a potentially lethal side effect in a very small percent of people. I think if it was being developed today, it may not even make it because of this side effect. But at the time, there weren't that many drugs, and it was very potent and otherwise relatively well tolerated. And so we knew we had done enough research to know that abacavir caused this reaction in about 5% of people who took it. And it wasn't lethal in all of them, but it could end to that in a small number. So working with a number of experts in the company, but also outside the company, one particular physician, Simon Malal from Perth, Australia, who did a lot of genetic work, we were able to actually discover a genetic anomaly in these patients who made it, their risk for this reaction was very, very high. And it's also interesting, that as you do this, and I've tell students this all the time. When I was in pharmacy school, did I ever think that I was going to be looking at, single nucleotide polymorphisms and genetic anomalies, and figuring out, how this one genetic anomaly could cause this reaction in patients. But we were able to discover the anomaly, and importantly, not just discover it, but also, because we were a commercial organization, we had the wherewithal to really go out and educate physicians and practitioners that they should be doing this test in patients before they give them the drug. So it wasn't saying who should get the drug, but we were really able to tell people who should never get our drug. And now it's really ingrained in therapy, so that if somebody's going to use that drug, abacavir, as part of their regimen, they need to get this test before they do it. And so I usually look back on that as one of my career achievements, that having been part of that and doing the studies, it's the best characterized genetic anomaly. So we call this personalized medicine. This is the best one out there. If people want to go look it up and read a very interesting history and story, that's a really good one to look at.
Mark, that is a great, a really great ending to what was a particularly troublesome period, because we were working so hard on that drug, and there didn't, we went. I remember us huddling on it. I remember us trying to figure out where we were going to go and what we were going to do. The FDA was really good to work with us at that time, and the drug did get a approval, but it did have a severe warning on the label. But I think the happy ending to it is the biogenetics that you did with the drug, with this fellow in Australia, and you actually, as you said, it was a superb drug. So the fact that it was able to come back and to be used with patients is phenomenal. So congratulations on that achievement. What a great achievement. Super.
Thank you.
I'm very excited about that, as you personally know why.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And again, kudos to our colleagues in Canada who actually had some of the first data, because they had a different population and it worked out better for them to actually start looking at using that as a test before they put people on therapy. They were very early adopters.
Mark, you've had a great career. What advice do you have for our students going into their careers? Because you and I were fortunate. We had this crossover to industry. Not everybody does it, but at the end of the day, as you said, like your mentor said to you, hey, you'll never know unless you try.
Right. I I think that's a key premise, Russ, and it's also about, and I've mentored a lot of younger people in their careers, and a lot of people are looking for that next promotion, the next dollar. And my own kids, I've talked to about this, and it's like money is important because you have to have enough to be able to survive and get along. But that the old premise that it doesn't buy happiness is really true. And so I usually tell people to look for things where they can, their passion is, and where they can get that passion as well as make a living doing it. If you can find that, it's not, I don't consider it a job. It's not really, that's I think the difference between a job and a career sometimes, right? I mean, I talk to people and they're like, they hate what they do. Oh, but I make all this money, but I hate it. Well, but how happy are you then? So I think that's an important one, is look for what really is your passion, and the good things will follow actually if you do that most of the time. The other thing is take risks. Don't be afraid to take risks sometimes. Calculated risks, of course. But it's if you're always conservative and you're not willing to step out a little bit. I had a mentee who was a pharmacy student, and she went through a very exclusive program at GlaxoSmithKline. And, she came to me and said, hey, there's a role for a chief of staff. It's a real stretch. And, a couple of us helped mentor her. She got the role, very young for that kind of role. But, it just shows that don't be afraid sometimes to stretch. Don't be afraid to reach for things. because you never know when one of those is going to happen. And it could be an incredible experience and launch your career in a totally different way. So, and I think for your students, the other piece is, you know, I spent 8 years and 9 years in higher education. You don't always have to do that. As you know, in industry, there are tons of jobs for people who have different levels of education. I work with people who don't have doctoral degrees, who have gone into, say, operations or regulatory sometimes, things like that, that, you know, may need that kind of education, but not always. And so, again, don't be afraid to look at different things and put your experience, you know, sell yourself a little bit, and it gives you the opportunity sometimes that you otherwise may not have if you just look at it and say, oh, I don't fit the criteria. Be willing to stretch a little bit, be willing to reach out in unique ways to people, and use your connections. You heard me saying that teamwork. Dr. Simon Malal, without working with Simon, we would have never cracked the HLA B5701 genetic marker. And so, you know, using your resources, your connections, never be afraid to go up to Russ and say, hello, here's my name. Meet people and use those networking connections. It's a huge thing. And you know, sometimes people just don't understand how important that networking piece is, especially earlier in your career. So that's what I would say.
Mark, these are such fantastic words of wisdom for our students. Obviously, you've done great things on the industrial side of biopharmaceuticals. I want to congratulate you for that. I want to congratulate you also for having the heart of a teacher. And I think that when our students and our community sees this video, that will strike and resonate with them very much. So congratulations. Thank you for joining us for the inaugural SciTech of the fall of 2021. And I wish you all the best in your new career with Hengrui, USA. And I know that you'll probably end up putting some other great antiviral drugs or anti-cancer drugs on the market.
Thank you so much, Russ. And thanks to Sean also for his help with this.
Great. Thanks so much.